I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.
A new public understanding has taken hold that the United States is an energy-rich, not an energy-poor nation. The recent report by the International Energy Agency projects that the United States will, by 2017, overtake Saudi Arabia as the world's leading oil producer, and by 2030 become a net energy exporter. We have, in other words, emerged from a decades-long period in which we believed that limited energy supplies and dependence on the Middle East suppliers were simple and unchanging facts of life. But now there is an energy supply revolution, and it's not confined to the United States. In June of this year, Mark Mills, senior fellow in the Manhattan Institute Center for Energy Policy and the Environment, released on Capitol Hill in Washington his paper describing a North American energy colossus, his phrase, one that includes our NAFTA trading partners, Mexico and Canada. The oil, gas, and coal of the three nations, wrote Mark, who leads the Institute's Power and Growth Initiative, have the potential, quote, to fuel growth and prosperity, not just to make it less expensive to heat our homes or to drive our cars, but to power a revival of American manufacturing, and it's already happening. Just as important are the geopolitical implications of reliable energy from countries not led by Hugo Chavez or Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. But are the benefits of this newly accessible supply of hydrocarbons inevitably going to be realized? Could poorly designed or poorly implemented regulation or problems in cross-border cooperation derail or undermine a North American energy boom? How, indeed, are energy issues viewed by our North American neighbors? Such are the questions we will explore today with a panel including distinguished guests from Mexico and Canada in discussion with Mark Mills and guided by the author of the Wall Street Journal's Outstanding Americas column, our moderator today, Mary Anastasia O'Grady. It's now my pleasure to turn our program over to Mary, who will introduce our panel members. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm delighted to be here, and even more delighted that we're going to talk about something other than the fiscal cliff. We're going to talk about growth, and specifically about what looks to be like a giant paradigm shift right here in North America on the energy front. The world is full of a lot of grim news, but I think our program today is guaranteed to lift your spirits. Now, there was a story in the Journal this morning that's kind of interesting about how it looks like, a lot of the deposits in shale that are around the world are proving a lot more difficult to extract. And that's going to be especially true in places like Argentina, where they're chasing all the investors away. And that means that North America has some really unique opportunities. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers all at once. I'm not going to read you their full bios. That would take half an hour because they're each such accomplished individuals. But each of them will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to open the program to questions so that what we hope we end up having is a very open discussion about the future of energy in North America. We'll begin today with Mark Mills, who's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and founder and CEO of the Digital Power Group, a tech-centric capital advisory group. He writes the Energy Intelligence column for Forbes and is co-author with Peter Huber of The Bottomless Well, which was published in 2005, and rose to #1 in Amazon Science. He's also kind of a celebrity of sorts, having appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And he served in the White House under Ronald Reagan, had an early career as an experimental physicist and development engineer, and is a member of the Advisory Council of the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science at Northwestern University. Our second speaker will focus on the important role that Canada is already playing in the North American energy boom and what the future holds. John Prato is the Consul General here in New York, the Canadian Consul General here in New York. It's hard to believe he's only held that job since March of 2011. Anyone in this city who has had any reason to engage with Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government knows John as an energetic and enthusiastic ambassador for our neighbor to the north and a great friend of New York City. Prior to taking the job, he worked as managing director in the equity capital markets group at TD Securities, which is the investment banking division of TD Bank Financial Group. And so that means that besides being a skilled diplomat, he also knows something about markets. And I should mention that he's not that bad on ice skates. Actually, the Canadians have ice skating parties. And I once went to one.
Mary's an impressive skater.
Mexico may be the closest to a wild card that we will have in this discussion because it has so much to offer and quite clearly has left itself out of the energy race so far. Whether that is changing will be something that we hope Luis de la Calle will address today. Luis is Mexican by birth, but I think it's fair to say that there are few individuals in the policy arena in North America today who have his binational experience. He earned a PhD in economics from the University of Virginia and has worked in a variety of posts related to Mexico's opening to international trade over the past 2 or 3 decades. Sorry if that makes you seem old, Luis. But
you have betrayed my age.
Most notably, he served as the Minister of Trade Issues at the Mexican Embassy in Washington, D.C., and was actively involved in the design, promotion, and implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And someone was mentioning to me at lunch how impressive it is how much Mexico has changed in the last 20 years, and I think so much of that can be attributed to NAFTA. Luis is also the managing director and founding partner of De La Calle, Madrazo, Mancera, which is a consulting firm specializing in economic and regulatory processes and matters related to international trade. So with that, we'll get started with Mark Miles. Mark?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Howard and Larry. You know, it's funny, it does date you when you find out, when I've been with audiences, particularly with students, that having worked in the Reagan White House a century ago doesn't buy you a lot of creds, but having been on Jon Stewart's show is, that's all they want to talk about, you know. What was he like? My kids did not want me to do the show. They thought I would be crucified. He was extraordinarily generous. And by the way, the only host doing a book tour who read the book, which is kind of fascinating. Nobody else read the book, not even putatively Lou Dobbs, who asked good questions but didn't read the book. Not that they should, by the way. That's just. I don't want to digress, but why in the world would you read a book like that? Unless you're an energy wonk. You have to be a true energy wonk to care. I've been involved in energy a long time, so let me begin. I have the easy task. I'm going to paint very briefly a picture of the facts of where we are and make a proposal of what should happen. I will leave to my colleagues from Canada and Mexico to help explain how we might achieve this fascinating opportunity that now presents itself to North America and to the United States. In an ideal world, policy would reflect reality. It doesn't generally do that in Washington, D.C., where I live, but eventually reality interferes and makes policy follow reality. So imagine it's 1973, and the energy policies that were put into place after the Arab oil embargo, which sort of set the paradigm for the next 40 years. Imagine if we used the demand and technology metrics of 1933 to establish energy policies in America. That's what we're doing today. We are still locked into a paradigm that was put into place in the 70s with respect to demand and respect to technology. So very quickly, what's changed in demand? At 1973, the United States was the largest and fastest growing energy consumer. Today, that's not true. We're not only not the largest, the fastest growth in energy demand is outside of North America. In the last 10 years alone, just in the last decade, the consumption of energy globally has increased by an amount equal to adding a United States of consumption. In the next 2 decades, the consumption of energy globally will increase by an amount equal to adding 2 North Americas. All that consumption is occurring almost entirely outside of North America. Now look how technology has changed in the last 40 years. 40 years ago, the idea of getting oil out of the deep oceans sitting in 10,000 feet of water and under 20,000 feet of rock below that water was technologically impossible, a dream, not even close to feasible, and yet deep water drilling dominates global production for many countries, and it's what everybody from Ireland to African nations pray they'll find, including America, off the coasts of our country. What's also changed technologically is simply information technology, materials science have profoundly altered the landscape for energy. So most people I talk to about energy act as if the idea of technology only took place in this part of the economy, non-energy. But the energy part of the economy somehow escaped any form of evolution in technology. It's profoundly changed. In fact, I would argue that technology has advantaged hydrocarbons more than it's advantaged the alternatives to hydrocarbons. There's been progress in both, but we know as a matter of fact that the progress in the efficacy, efficiency, and cost and the resource base of hydrocarbons has benefited more from technology than everything else combined. In fact, every single forecast that's credible, and by credible I mean at all ends of the political spectrum, sees that 60 to 80% of all future demand for energy will come from hydrocarbons, coal, oil, and gas. The other 30 to 40%, it's a lot of energy, and believe me, those are huge markets. The world trades about $6 trillion in energy annually. So getting 20, 30% of that is a big market, and people who are trading in non-hydrocarbons have a lot of opportunity. But the mothership is in hydrocarbons. What's also changed, of course, is the demand has shifted, so has the supply. North America has 6 times more total hydrocarbon resources than all of the Middle East, 600% more. What makes it accessible is the same thing that made the North Sea oil accessible. It's technology, and principally access to things like oil sands and oil shales. As technology advances, the cost of extracting difficult hydrocarbons improves, and it's improved radically. So I'll end with this observation, though, what's now possible. The world has shifted. It's turned upside down. The world needs a lot of energy. It needs a lot of hydrocarbons. We're not the primary growth in consumption, but we can be and are increasingly becoming the primary growth in supply. North America could forward something that I would just call, and I'll put the word, the idea out in this form, of something like a North American common energy market in which the future will look different than it would otherwise have looked. The future, with all the energy demand growth that's going on, was going to have 2 primary suppliers on the margin, the Middle East and Russia. The new future that's possible has the 3rd player, North America, and it could be the biggest supplier of marginal energy to the world and trade, period. And to achieve that, just to give you a last number to think about, North America would have to increase its infrastructure and production of hydrocarbons by about 70% to become a larger supplier of hydrocarbons to the world than the entire Middle East. To get a 70% growth in infrastructure, I've asked this question individually of many companies, could you increase what you do by 70% over, say, 10 years? That's 7% a year growth. There isn't a single company that doesn't say they couldn't do that technically. The impediments tend to be regulatory and political, not technical or financial. So that's a goal. It's possible. We, North America, could become the largest single supplier of hydrocarbons to the world. This would, to use the infamous phrase, reset the geopolitical landscape in ways nothing else has in decades by becoming the single largest supplier of hydrocarbons to the world. And along the way, we would generate in North America millions of jobs, not hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs, and trillions of dollars of net economic benefit. Not billions of dollars, but numbers that actually matter now even in Washington, trillions of dollars. All it requires is a common sense approach to creating a common market for energy in North America with the world's biggest, most sophisticated, most extensive infrastructure and technologies for extracting hydrocarbons at prices and scales the world needs. The world is going to consume the energy. It's going to buy from somebody. It should be us. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. That was excellent, and we'll have a lot of questions for you, I'm sure. Our next speaker will be Consul General Prato.
Thank you, Mary. And first of all, thank you for everyone for coming here today, and thank you to the Manhattan Institute for organizing this event. Just one little quick about Mary. I admired Mary's writings long before I came here to New York, so it was a real privilege to finally meet her when I came here.
I thought you were going
And
to say
she
my
is a good ice
skating.
skater. If someone would have told me that before coming here to New York, after 20 years working in investment banking, that I would be spending so much time on energy, I would never have believed it. But I spend the majority of my time on two key issues, energy and security. If we were meeting here in 2008 and we were discussing LNG, we'd be discussing the importation of LNG. Yet 2 years later, we'd have to rethink and think about the exportation. So when Mary is talking about a paradigm shift, that's perhaps an understatement because I just can't find the right word to tell you about the change in energy for North America. And we hear a lot of negative news, but this is extremely positive news for us. Let me put it into context. To understand energy between Canada and the United States and Mexico, you have to understand the relationship between Canada and the United States from a trading relationship. It's the largest trading relationship in the world, largest commercial relationship in the world, and it's also the most productive. It's $680 billion of goods and services. That's $1.9 billion a single day between Canada and the United States. 1.3 million every single minute. It's responsible for some 8 million jobs in this country. 35 of the 50 states call Canada their #1 export market. And it's also a very balanced trade between the two nations. A key component of that trade is energy. Canada exports just over $100 billion of energy to this country. We're the #1 exporters of electricity, or what we call hydro, uranium, natural gas, and oil. In fact, I'm somewhat shocked sometimes when I meet my fellow Americans down here and they tell me that they were thinking it was Saudi Arabia, but it's not. It's Canada, and it's Canada by a long shot. So when you take it into context, what do we offer? 6th largest producer of oil in the world, 3rd largest producer of natural gas in the world, 2nd largest producer of uranium in the world, and 3rd largest of natural gas. So, the hydro. When you take it into account, let me focus for a moment on oil, because as you see these statistics, you see that we are an energy-rich nation, and we're a democracy, and we're a close ally. So if you're thinking about safe, secure, stability, you're thinking about trade with Canada within energy. I want to start for a moment on oil. We have approximately 175 billion barrels of reserve. Roughly 170 is in the oil sands, 5 billion what I would call conventional. The potential, though, is roughly 10 times that amount with the right technology, as Mark has mentioned, and the right price. Next door, you've got a neighbor that is oil rich. And the question for America will be, how much of Canadian oil will you want? Right now, if I take a look at 2011, we were supplying 2.2 million barrels a day. Now, when we talk about figures, we have to watch out that I'm talking about oil here. If you include petroleum products, it jumps up a little higher. In the first 8 months of this year, we're running a rough 2.5 million barrels per day. So that's a 300,000 barrel increase. If you take a look at the statistics coming from the US government, Canada represents roughly 29% of the importation of energy products, meaning oil, in this case, and petroleum products, 29%. So while you're producing more and your imports are going down, Canada's taking a bigger piece of what you import, and we have the potential to supply even more. Natural gas, we peaked at around 10.5 million cubic feet, pardon me, 10.5 billion cubic feet in 2007, and we decreased now to about 8.5 billion. That's a reflection of the fact that you're finding new products. And really, there's potential to export natural gas also to Canada, as there is for some oil. Now, you export a very little amount of oil to Canada, but the reality is it goes back and forth. That's a sign of the integration and the sophistication of the energy market between our two countries. And it particularly works, you'll see it on electricity as well. So when we look at the potential for growth, we're producing roughly 3 million barrels today. We're going to go to 6 million barrels per day. Now, some people view that as a 2030, others are 2035, but the trajectory is definitely much higher, and the potential to serve this country is significant. The other key part is it brings jobs to this country. And let me be specific here. There's over 1,000 companies that service the oil sands here in the United States. There's some 1,400 companies that service American companies that are involved in the refining and transportation of Canadian oil. So there's a lot of opportunities. But I want to tell you, as positive as I am, there are some challenges. And the challenges are the same for all three of our countries. It's not a challenge of supply, it's a challenge of getting the product to market. We've got large new finds, but the infrastructure that we have in place has not kept up with the finds. So that's going to be one of the challenges, and also investment opportunities. The other part that we're really proud about in Canada right now is the recent budget passed new regulations, which I think are going to be important in terms of approval process. So we're capping it at 24 months, depending on the size. It's either 24 months, 18 months, or 12 months. So that gives a degree of certainty. So when you look at energy from the perspective of Canada, you see abundant supply, you see strong integration, you see security of supply as well. So that's why I'm very optimistic on what we can do, all three of us together.
Thank you, John. Luis.
Thank you, Mary, for your presentation, and thank you, the Manhattan Institute, for the invitation to speak on this very important issue with John and Mark. Being positive about North America these days is a little politically incorrect with the fiscal cliff and the grand bargain and the difficulties that people are facing, the unemployment, and arguing that Mexico has a bright future is also politically correct in Mexico, in the US, and other places. But if you look at the broader picture and imagine North America in the next 30, 20 years, you will see that we have probably the best demographics in the world. The US has a good demographics, Canada not as good, Mexico has best demographics in the world, much better than our competitors in Asia or Europe, maybe with the exception of the Middle East, where they have another demographic problem with too many children that we don't have now. If you look at the potential to feed the world, I mean, people are talking about food security and the food crisis. If one region is going to feed the world, that's North America. North America will end up feeding Asia, China, and India. And then if you look at the industry, let me make a prediction. Everybody's making it now. We'll see an industrial renaissance in the US. Not because you will have a reindustrialization ministry as in France, but because there is structural market forces that will make industry a growing sector in the US. And one of the reasons for that happening is, of course, the energy revolution and the industrial technical revolution also going on through 3D printing and other techniques that will bring production closer to the marketplace. If there is one country that might benefit from these trends, demographics, agriculture, industry, energy, and technological revolution, that's Mexico. Because Mexico has become North America's industrial platform. We have now the plants to do the final goods that we export to the world with significant North American components. That process will only accelerate. The economists predicted last week that Mexico will surpass China as the largest supplier of manufactured goods to the US in 5 years. We have already surpassed Canada. Canada is larger than Mexico exporting to the US only because of oil. But in terms of manufacturing, Mexico is now, for structural reasons, more efficient, more competitive, and this will only grow. So the country that might benefit the most from these revolutions is Mexico, but the country that is more likely to miss the boat is also Mexico. If we don't do the necessary reforms to make this possible. Right. So we Mexicans need to ask ourselves, and we have a new government that was inaugurated on Saturday, a basic question. Are we willing to take the cost to make the changes necessary to become a developed country in the next 30 years? We have fallen in the last decades in what I call a trap. People say in Mexico, and that we have conveyed that to the US government many times, I was in government, I can tell you this firsthand, that we could not do the reforms for ideological reasons. And it's 10% ideology and 90% interest that prevent the changes from happening. And interest you can overcome either by having the public opinion with you, so invite all Mexicans to participate in a large debate, and Mexicans are more modern than our politicians. And I'm sure that if we ask Mexicans whether they want to become developed, they would say yes. Every time they vote with their feet, they're showing their willingness to improve their lives, and of course they do it. It's an investment for them. And the other way is, of course, to compensate the losers. And in public policy, maybe you will do a combination of both. Win the debate and also compensate the losers to make these changes possible. But if the US reindustrializes because of the decline in natural gas prices thanks to the shale gas revolution, and Mexico does not have natural gas at those prices and volumes in our industry, we will not benefit from the reindustrialization process in which we can benefit the most. And the larger problem we have in Mexico is that we don't have an energy market. Prices are determined by the Treasury and volumes by Pemex. Well, that is not conducive to really transform the energy market in Mexico. So the question we should ask ourselves is, are we willing to have a common North American market for energy goods? There is no need to change the Mexican Constitution. We can do it through NAFTA. And if we cannot agree with the US and Canada, we should do it unilaterally. Just open Mexico's market to the importation of energy goods and also exportation of them. We also need to change land tenure regime in Mexico, not only to lay the pipelines and have the right of way for, as John was saying, the big challenge we have is how to get this natural gas to markets. And the only way to do it is through laying pipelines all over that are truly connected across borders, so that when there is scarcity, prices go up and then the gas is supplied. But we also need to maybe take advantage of land tenure discussions in Mexico to see whether we would be willing to change the oil regime and give shale gas, non-conventional gas and oil, the same regime as mining, and revolutionary, maybe a preferential regime for communal lands. If you want Mexico to truly develop, give communal lands, the so-called ejidos in Mexico, the ability to exploit their own natural resources, and you will see a revolution that will transform Mexico. And I think that this is the right time to ask the question as to whether we want to have energy as a spark plug for true development in Mexico. Thank you, Mary.
Excellent, thank you. Let's. I want to start by just clarifying something Luis said. I'm not sure how many people in this room are really familiar with Mexico, but after the Mexican Revolution, there were these communal lands, they call them ejidos, and some of them were dissolved, I understand, during the Salinas administration, but others remain still.
Only 1%.
Only 1%, okay, I didn't realize that. And are they mostly in the south of the country, the ones that are left?
All throughout Mexico.
Well, it's a very provocative idea. I hadn't heard that before. But if I could just follow up with you on the opening of the energy market, because I want to do a little thought experiment here. I mean, President Peña Nieto just comes into office 2 days ago, and let's suppose that tomorrow he announces that he's going to open the energy market in the way that you described in order to basically allow Mexicans to figure out what the prices are, because we don't know since they're set by the government. I mean, the first thing I think of is an incredible backlash from the Pemex union. And they have a strong influence with the PRI, which is his party. I mean, how do you see that actually happening politically?
Well, most of the talk in Mexico and in the campaign and in the last few days as President Peña came to power has been whether we should allow private investment to participate in Pemex's operations and how to strengthen Pemex. And those are good initiatives. I mean, a strengthening of Pemex and having private sector participation in drilling and exploration is fairly good, but it's not enough. I mean, without having a market that will send the right price signals, development of the smart drilling that we need to do the non-conventional oil and gas will be very hard. So I mean, we have to go beyond what the people have now in their plans, which is a strengthening of Pemex and having a more flexible contract system so that Pemex can enter into joint ventures with the private sector suppliers. But we need to have Pemex competing against other companies all over the place. I mean, I think it's quite possible to devise a mechanism where you have a 100% monopoly on the ownership of the fields and 100% competition on everything else. And I think this is the right time to make that argument and win the debate. Now, how do you convince the unions? Well, I think you convince the unions by reminding them that their pensions are not funded. And that the best way to assure that those pensions get funded is precisely by having a lot more productive and wealth-creating energy market, as Mark was saying, that will produce billions or trillions of pesos or dollars that will help fund those pensions. So, I mean, average Pemex worker now is 55. Well, he's thinking about retirement, and this is the right time to make a bold proposal to fund those pensions against the reforms that we need.
Thank you. Mark, let me ask you, during your comments, you said that, I think you went down a list and you sort of said, we have the energy, we have the technology, we have the investment, but we also have a problem coming out of Washington, which
Lots of them.
yeah, which seems to resist this vision that all three of you are talking about. I mean, it's our president and a good part of our government seems to be opposed to further development in hydrocarbons. Do you think that over the next 4 years we could reasonably see something that's much more aggressive in terms of developing hydrocarbons, even with this president, this EPA, this State Department, which doesn't like pipelines that go across borders? How do you see that playing out?
So I'll say I'm an optimistic cynic on this. I think the amount of money that's available to Luis's point and to our governments and our unions is overwhelming. We're not talking a few thousand jobs and a few $1 million. We're talking millions of jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars, probably trillions. So my suspicion is the bellwether will be the XL pipeline, the Trans-Canada pipeline. That's going to be so my prediction today would be that the president gave the Greens what they wanted in his last term. I think he gives the private sector unions what they want in this term, which are jobs. And these are just that one pipeline, as John knows, is thousands, tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. It's a staggering number for one pipeline. 20,000 jobs. So it's just one pipeline, privately funded. So I think there's going to be a lot of momentum towards this because of the money. I think there's an opportunity for fig leaves on the environmental side with respect to safety, cleanliness, and because it genuinely can be said to be very clean and possible, and a new route for the pipeline, maybe some new soft regulations. I'm not a fan of regulations, but ultimately EPA is going to weigh in on fracking, and there'll be some soft, I hope, regulations. I guess I'll give one other bellwether as I would take out of California. Is, the old expression is, as California goes, so goes a nation.
That's pretty depressing.
It's not entirely depressing. So Prop 13 started the tax revolution in 1978, which some people said was closely related to the Reagan Revolution. So we got Prop 30 this time, which raises taxes. The difference is we had a huge tsunami of tax cutting from Prop 13. We got a little fig leaf nibble at tax increases in Prop 30. Jerry Brown didn't come close to covering the nut on his long-term debt is almost $400 billion, and he gets $6 billion a year out of Prop 30. But if he were to unleash the Monterey Shale with the BLM, which the federal government controls, Bureau of Land Management, there's just for the state $250 billion of tax receipts from fully developing the Monterey Shale outside Central Valley. So interesting bellwether. Last year, quietly, Jerry Brown fires the two regulators in charge of leasing the oil shales of California. Why did he fire them? Because oil shale leases went down 70%. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a political challenge on both sides of the border, north and south. But I think the money and jobs, when packaged properly against the reality that this is modern technology, can be done cleanly. I think it's going to come down just to money. I mean, I really think this is going to be a huge force. But I'm not at all naive about the power of silly ideas to prevail and stop it from happening.
Okay, thank you. John, whereas the U.S. has more of a problem out of Washington, Prime Minister Harper has been very gung-ho on energy development, and this time spent in Alberta is certainly helpful to that end. But on the investment side, Canada's been a little bit conflicted, I think, about opening markets to all investors from all over the world, and in particular right now, China's on the scene and also Malaysia. Do you think that resource nationalism has a chance of resurging in Canada, and could that put a little bit of a damper on the development of energy?
Well, you raise a really valid question and a good question. Canada has a history of welcoming and being open and hospitable to foreign capital, and it will continue to do so because it's played a key role in the development of a very capital-intensive economy. Let's face it, energy is very capital-intensive, and we've been very open to foreign investment, and we will continue to be open to foreign investment. It was clear the Prime Minister has been very clear on this issue. We are open to foreign capital. It's going to have to show net benefits to Canada, but we're open. There's no disputing that point. When Minister Oliver was here in New York just over a month ago, he mentioned that in the next 10 years, we have on the drawing board over $650 billion of capital projects. And we're going to be open to the world on those projects. So there's no ambiguity on this. We are open to foreign capital, demonstrating a net benefit to Canada. And that has not changed.
Okay.
I know what you think.
Well, I'm thinking about the company in Manitoba. Was it in Manitoba?
Potash.
Yeah, potash.
Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan.
We have a process, and the Minister of Industry is responsible for that process. And decisions were made on a net benefit basis. But if you take a look at the history, and if you're sitting in an investment field like I was for 20 years, you look at the comparables around the world, and you will see that Canada is open to foreign capital. We have a history of it. Now, there's a net benefit test, and the Minister of Industry is responsible for it, along with the rest of Cabinet. They make a decision if it's a net benefit to Canada, and decisions are made. But our track record, when you compare it around the world, is impeccable. We are open to foreign capital, particularly in the energy sector. It has always played a role in the development of Canada's energy sector. I'm thinking of some of the large companies here in the United States. When I go to the oil sands, I see Devon Energy, I see Chevron, I see Exxon's Curl project. I mean, we have over $600 billion of projects in the next 10 years. Everybody in this room should be excited and looking to Canada.
Has the experience with Keystone Pipeline strained the energy relationship between the U.S. and Canada?
No, the relationship between Canada and the U.S. is a very deep and large and significant relationship. The process right now is before the state of Nebraska. In fact, December 4th, tomorrow is the last day for submissions in the state, and then it'll go to the State Department. And from the State Department, they will put together a supplement EIS, which is an environmental impact study, and then it'll go from State Department to the White House. And we respect that this nation has a process for making decisions. We're two sovereign nations. We respect that.
That should
We hope, and we remain optimistic that Keystone XL will be approved. But we also respect the fact that America's got a process.
Yeah.
Let me add a non-diplomatic thought, because John has to be a careful diplomat on these issues. I know that a lot of Canadians were shocked and unhappy about the process as it exists today. But I was shocked and unhappy to discover, and maybe everybody here knows this, I didn't, that it's illegal to export crude from the United States without the approval of the Commerce Department. It's illegal to export natural gas without approval from the Department of Energy. I can go through a long list of these things. That's nuts. It's just affirmatively nuts. So how do you get around it? Well, some of these old laws, which date back to 1920s and 30s, where we thought we just didn't have a lot of the stuff, and it was precious and we couldn't sell it to other people. It'd be like requiring the Department of Agriculture to approve wheat exports. We traffic at 40% of the world's grain out of the United States, and the Department of Agriculture has an Office of Export Assistance to help farmers export wheat. We have the inverse in the Department of Energy, which is upside down and is affirmatively silly. One way to break this logjam would simply to be my common energy market. Let's at least break it down for North America. Why should you have to have approval to send crude north to Canada where it can be refined better, and Canadian crude for the heavier refineries that are more effective for that in the Gulf Coast? They got to go through approvals. Fine, everybody respects everybody's process. The process, in my opinion, is silly. On the face of it, should be gone.
Mark's referring to a rule that was developed in 1975. The reality is that it's pretty easy to get the permission to ship to Canada. But I want to bring it back to the XL for a moment. And I'm going to refer to Keystone as XL so we don't get confused with the other Keystone, because there's two Keystones. One's in place already, and XL is the one we're talking about. XL is not only important for Canada, it's important for the United States, because 25%, up to 25% of XL will be light oil from the Bakken. Right now, it's roughly 50% of the Bakken is being shipped on rail. It's actually 49%, but let's say it's half. And while that's a good outcome because the market's found a way of bringing the product to the market, pipelines are the most efficient, lowest cost, and the safest.
Okay.
And that's why XL is important for both nations. And to keep in mind the integration, oil comes into Canada from the Bakken so that it then can be shipped down south because of lack of infrastructure. So you're exporting to get the product back to your own market.
Thanks, John, for pointing that out. Okay, let's open it up to questions from, yes, back there, please. Go ahead. And if you could tell us who you are and also tell us where you're directing your question, that would be helpful.
John Dicer, the Financial Times. A question for Mr. Prato. Do you think that are you confident there's sufficient supplies of natural gas for the heating and hydrogenation of the tar sands over time? Do you think that the schedule for developing those are in line with the requirements for the tar sands? Also, as they're in looking at the unconventional resources in Mexico, this is a very, very interesting idea of giving the mineral rights back, because it's been the possession of mineral rights that has driven development in North America and especially in the States. What are the prospects for getting that done? And is it necessary to have any constitutional changes in Mexico in order to open this up? As I recall, many of the Pemex restrictions were constitutionally based and very rigorously defended. But Mr. Prato, if you could answer the question about gas supplies for the hydrogenation.
Absolutely. And this is common to both our countries and also with Mexico once they start developing on the non-conventional energy component through shale. Our challenge on natural gas is the numbers keep going up, right? So, I mean, whether you're talking about a 100-year supply or even larger, I mean, it's significant. And when you look at the fact that we're now looking to LNG for our natural gas because there's just too much, if you take a look on the western part of the country, the three significant LNG plays, and I'm talking about northeastern BC, the Montney, and then further down south, Alberta Cretaceous. I always have a hard time with that word, so I hope I pronounced it right. Just those three for shipping. I mean, there's so much that we can't even consume it internally that we have to look externally, and that's just on the western part of the country. What's happening now, and it's happening also in this country here, is that we're finding natural gas in places we didn't believe we had any. Let me give you an example. Southwestern Energy, which is one of your best natural gas pure plays, you know, if you take a look at the recent report, 3.8 million acres of undeveloped land, 2.5 million are in the province of New Brunswick, which is out east. 2.5 million. And that doesn't take into account also the potential within the province of Quebec. So the challenge we're going to face is not one of domestic consumption, whether it's for industry or residential or use for the oil sands, but we're having to focus now on LNG.
Yeah. On the other questions, creating a market for energy in Mexico does not require constitutional change. I mean, the only thing it does, we require to do changes to federal law so that the monopoly of trading of energy goods is not in the hands of Pemex or the power company CFE. Now, in terms of giving mining rights to either communal lands or others, that would require a constitutional change. But I mean, according to the Constitution, the mining ores and the hydrocarbon deposits underground belong to the nation, capital N, but a concession can be given, as they are given today on mining, and it would be a matter of replicating that to hydrocarbon for non-conventional. But it does require a constitutional change. The probability of that happening is very low. The probability of happening if nobody proposes it, 0.
Yes, please.
My question is for Mark Mills. My name is Heffernan. I'm a consultant to the metallurgical industries. How much revenue do you think New York State has lost because of its anti-fracking forces?
New York State or New York
Yes.
City? Manhattan Institute had a fine study done on this last year. For some economists looked at the Marcellus Shale's revenue potential, tax potential for the state of New York. I'm embarrassed I've forgotten the number. It's a large number. It's billions of dollars. The Marcellus is big in New York. I mean, it's physically a large resource, and I know that there's some lawsuits pending between landowners in New York State against the state. Essentially, a version of takings, I think, is the premise. I'm not a lawyer, but they want to develop it. It's frankly shocking. I mean, I did this piece of work before the election, but it's relevant after the election. The 10 top beneficiary states of the union from accelerated fracking and availability of fracking on private state lands, not BLM lands. Of those 10, 5 of them are swing states. We're Colorado, Ohio, Michigan. I mean, this is remarkable. So we have tens of thousands of jobs. I know people. I have a lot of friends in upstate. My kids went to Cornell, and so we talked to people. Young men and women are going south to Pennsylvania to work, leaving the state. They're going to, not North. They don't have to go to North Dakota. They can go to Ohio. Ohio is on track to balancing its budget now, not because GM stayed alive in the state of Ohio, courtesy of a Republican governor. That wasn't the deal. That was 400 jobs, some number like that. It's the industrial infrastructure around fracking. There's 6 jobs in the economy for every 1 in the field. And it's rescued Ohio. It's rescued North Dakota. It could rescue California. New York is sitting there on hundreds of billions of dollars of tax receipts and jobs. And I do know that I understand the zeitgeist that fracking is evil and bad. I get that. But as I said to some friends, can you imagine if we hadn't let the engineers name it, fracking, and we called it smart drilling, which is what it is, because hydraulic fracturing is 80 years old. Smart drilling is real young. If it was smart drilling, who would have big signs with a big arrow through it, against smart drilling. Wouldn't happen. We'd have a few $100 billion more in the state treasury. We lost the battle, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Robert James, I'm a businessman here. I have a question, but first I want to ask you, the panel, if you would consider that you're oil men. And if you're oil men, you will find that we will not drill in Canada or the United States. Well, in Canada for less than like $60 for this, maybe 50 a barrel. In the United States, maybe 50 to 80. Now, that means that we'll be the world's greatest producer of oil, and gas probably too, at a price.
Always at a price.
Yeah. Now go back if you're an oil man, and you'll look and say, oh, in the last 10 or 15 years, oil has been, what, 4, 5, 6 years? It was from $20 to $40 a barrel? And you've all forgotten it. I know. Businessman, oil man, you do not forget this. Now, what are the prices of the alternative oil? Nigeria, Venezuela, Mexico, if they get their act together, Middle East. We don't know for sure, but it's probably a lot lower. So why are you so sure, the question is, that we're going to be the greatest producer of oil?
Who's taking it?
Yeah.
You go first.
Well,
Then I'll correct you if you're wrong.
no. So let's have a look at pricing right now. So WTI on Friday was about $88. Western Canadian Select, which is the benchmark for Canadian heavy crude, and Western Canadian Select is a combination of blends of around 19 different crudes, was roughly $58. Okay. The mean differential between WTI and Western Canadian Select is on average about 20%, although it's wider today. That's just a mean average, and that's coming from a Canadian bank. So if the question is, what pricing do you need? It's very difficult to give you a pricing that would give us the large production increase. For the simple reason is, not all reserves, not all oil production is the same. So there are some that can be very profitable at lower levels and others that will need higher levels. Within the oil sand, some of it will depend on the technology. And what we forget is that when I talk about Canada having the third largest oil reservoir in the world, it's also a technology incubator. And that goes the same for all energy in the United States as well. So it's very difficult to say, here's the price that you need, because it'll vary. It'll vary on your steam to oil ratio, for example, which is based on technology. It'll vary according to the quality of the mine. Is it closer to the surface? Is it deeper? So there's a host of different attributes that'll play a role in that price. But the market has a way of bringing that product to the market. For example, here in the United States, some of your largest gas companies have got half the number of rigs in place from the previous year. But guess what? The production is the same through technology. So if the question is on pricing, price is a signal to the market, and companies will react to that, whether they'll bring in additional technology to lower the actual cost. And some of your best producers here in the United States are operating cash flow positive at $1.11. So if Henry Hub today is around $3.80, they're doing okay. So it'll vary by company and the type of resource itself. Conventional, light, heavy, sour, sweet.
I want to add to this real quickly. By the way, I do know the question comes from not just a businessman, but a businessman who knows a lot about oil. So he's been in the business long enough to see the cycles when it was in single digits. And today's dollar is about 20, right, when at the nadir. The interesting thing about this, obviously it's about price, always and obviously, and clearly technology drives price and demand drives price. Technology unlocks resources of different kinds, and it unlocked the North Sea. It was impossible at any price in 1970 to get it. Now it's possible at about $7 of finding and lifting. Nobody would have thought the North Sea was available at $7. No one would ever think the oil sands would be available at $7. It's available in numbers I see between 20 and 80. Some of it's 100. Technology will drag it down. But here's the pricing thing that's really fascinating that I think changes the game. Setting aside a world pandemic and a huge recession, in the middle of this recession that started, the global recession, the price of oil did not collapse. I mean, it softened to the 60s. The world's largest recession in 70 years, we could not get oil below $70, $65, $62. If the world recovers at all, and it will eventually, it may take a lot, but if it recovers at all, the demand against another billion automobiles, another trillion air miles, just that alone is so inconceivably large that if I'm extraordinarily bullish on prices. I think our bigger problem is price spikes will shock the world. And if we got a price in relative terms equal to the delta of 1973, it would set the world back into a recession. We had a 300% price gain in 3 days in 73. We can't do the math today. This is not a $200 barrel. This is $300 oil. That would who knows what that would do to capital markets. So I think the incentives are there, and John's absolutely right. It's going to be, each businessman will make a decision. I guess what I'm voting for is let's unlock the markets and let the business guys make the decisions. There'll be a few younger ones who will have forgotten the low prices and be more eager. Great.
You should also comment that Brent, which is the market price for Europe, is at 111.
Luis, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I agree with the arguments, but I share the concern. I mean, I think today's prices, we should not extrapolate linearly any of the prices of production, and the market has surprised us with the shale gas revolution, and it might surprise us again with prices coming down. But I mean, if we have a free market, the common market, the market will fix it up. But I mean, North America will not produce the same at whichever price. I mean, it will be very sensitive to price levels. So it's a consideration, no question. We should avoid subsidies, not to promote energy production in North America that we don't want.
Would those include credit subsidies by the Federal Reserve?
Well, I mean, the big question is whether prices are high because of China or because of Bernanke. I think it's 60% China, 40% Bernanke.
Mary, if I might, in answer to the gentleman's question, the Manhattan Institute study by the economist Timothy Considine. Sorry, in answer to the gentleman's question, the Manhattan Institute study on the Marcellus Shale, possible 75,000 to 90,000 jobs and $1.4 billion in tax revenues for state and localities a year.
Those are real numbers. They're useful.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The environmentalists are very concerned about farming and the Keystone Pipeline. So I was wondering how that's being addressed or if that's a problem at all.
The development of resources in Canada, we have a history of doing it in a responsible manner, and the environment's really important to us. Let me put it in a context here. We have the same environmental goals as the United States coming out of the Copenhagen. The same. So it's a 17% reduction off of base year 2005 by 2020. The way we're going to go about doing it is going to be different. Our economies are different. Coal does not play a large factor in Canada for electricity. Our electricity is roughly 61% hydro, and when you add nuclear, we're about 75% greenhouse gas emission free. With respect to the oil sands, we decreased the greenhouse gas emissions by 26% since about 2000. So it's 26% reduction. And we will continue to work on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. We have a plan. The largest amount of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada is not the oil sands, it's the transportation sector. And we are working on decreasing those levels. So we've got the same plan. We're about halfway there to our 2020 goal, and we have more work to do.
There's one, in terms of spillage, which is another concern at the local community level for farmers, pipelines that might break. So to my friends who, in these communities, I tell them first, we have millions of miles of pipelines. This is not a new technology, and so newer pipelines tend to be safer and less likely to break, but they can happen. But what's going on now instead, which is much more hazardous in terms of the risk, is we're taking the oil not just by train, but by truck. There's so much oil gushing out of the center of North America that people are economically, productively trucking it. It should be in pipelines. It's cleaner, safer, more efficient.
It's most efficient.
But just from a community safety perspective, I take a pipeline over rail, not to be mean to my rail friends, and a truck anytime.
Did you have something to add?
I'd like to make a proposal, but not on that environmental thing.
Okay, well, I'll give you the last word.
Listening to Consul General John Prato, I was thinking that if the UK went to Canada to get their new governor for the central bank to run their monetary policy, maybe Mexico should import the Canadian to run our Secretary of Energy, and the US Secretary of Treasury to solve the fiscal cliff.
I think that sounds good.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.